Tonight, I want to show you some interesting things concerning Jesus' arrest. When he had the Last Supper on Thursday night, assuming a Thursday night Last Supper and a Friday crucifixion, a lot of these things can be adjusted. There's different, ideas if it's Thursday night or Friday. Even some of the locations where these things take place have been adjusted as archaeology develops. In fact, my book, Framework for Christian Faith in 2010, I've got a map here that I'm going to be using, but I've even made some adjustments on that map where certain these trials took place because we've had improvements made. But assuming there was a Thursday night Last Supper, that would have ended about 1 o'clock late in the evening, or they would have arrived at least to the Mount of Olives, Garden of Gethsemane, about 1 o'clock. And Jesus is going to pray for about an hour in the Garden of Gethsemane before the troops arrive with the betrayer to arrest him and bring him to a series of trials that are going to take place. If he prays in the Garden of Gethsemane between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock, if the arrest takes place at 2 o'clock, he's going to be on the cross at 9 o'clock that next morning. So you've got a period of about 7 hours where he's going to go through 6 trials. He's going to appear before Annas, the former high priest. Then he's going to go to Caiaphas, the acting high priest. Then he's going to be sent to the Sanhedrin, who can't assemble and meet until the sun rises. After they've met, they're going to go to Pilate to see if they can get permission to crucify or execute Jesus. Pilate's going to hear the case, but finds him innocent, and trying to get rid of the situation is going to send him to Herod, Antipas, who's right there in town. And Herod Antipas is going to mock Jesus, then send him back to Pilate. So you've got Annas, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, Pilate, Herod Antipas, and Pilate for the second time. 6 different trials in a matter of 7 hours, and then Jesus will be sent to the cross. So we are going to begin first in John chapter 18, verse 19. And this is where Jesus has been arrested at about 2 o'clock in the Garden of Gethsemane. He's been led back into Jerusalem, down to the western part of the city. It's where the wealthy people live. It's where the mansions of the high priests are. In fact, this is where Jesus had the Last Supper, in one of the upper rooms in John Mark's mother's house. She had a servant. We see him also meeting there in the book of Acts. So he would have been in this part of the city for the Last Supper. Went out from the Last Supper, goes out to the Garden of Gethsemane, prays for an hour. He is arrested on the Garden of Gethsemane and then brought back into this part of town to Annas, the former high priest. He is like the godfather. He lost his high priest position at the age of 36 in the year 15 AD. He was high priest between 6 and 15 AD, lost his high priesthood because the Romans realized he had too much power and removed him from office, putting his son in position. And now his son-in-law, Caiaphas, is the high priest. He's the official high priest, but Annas has gone nowhere. He's like the godfather in the shadows running this whole operation. You can see this even in the text of Scripture. So the first place Jesus is going to go, very interestingly, is to meet with Annas before he actually meets with the acting high priest, Caiaphas, before he's sent to the Sanhedrin, who can't assemble until the sun comes up. So this is going to take place, the arrest at 2 o'clock about. He's going to meet with Annas about 2:30 in the morning on Friday morning, 2:30 in the morning. Verse 19 of chapter 18 of John. The high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all the Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who have heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. When he had said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, Is that how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, If what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? In other words, if I said the truth, you have no right to hit me. But if I did something wrong, make your accusation. You have not even made a case yet. You're just beating a prisoner. This is basically what Jesus is saying. So much for turning the other cheek. There's Jesus getting slapped and not turning the other cheek, saying, this doesn't seem very legal to me. Indeed, it's not legal. Annas then sent him bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. You're going to see Roman law, Jewish religion, all break down here. Already, Jesus called this a false trial. He's being sent by the godfather Annas now to Caiaphas, and now this is going to be about 3 o'clock, and beginning in chapter 18 of John, verse 25. Now this is when Simon standing and warming himself. So they said to him, you also are not one of his disciples, are you? And he denied it, and we have a series of Jesus denying. or Peter denying Jesus. We also see this take place, he being sent to Caiaphas in Matthew 26, verse 57. I'm going to go there very quickly. Matthew 26, verse 57. Then those who had seized Jesus led him to Caiaphas, the high priest. Now this is the high priest, not the godfather behind the scenes, where the scribes and elders had gathered. Now again, their mansions would be very close together, so it's not very far to take him. That's why it's going to take place between 2:30, 3 o'clock, and they're going to keep him active there, bound until the Sanhedrin can arrive. And then it talks about Peter betraying him during those times there. Here's what takes place there. Now the chief priests and the whole council were seeking false testimony against Jesus, they might put him to death. They found none, though many false witnesses came forward, and they asked him to testify against himself. Now, here's the case. It goes like this. They say to him, they've got part of the council. It's not the official Sanhedrin meeting that's going to take place when the sun rises. They've just got a few guys out of bed. It says right here, they were seeking false testimony against Jesus that they might put him to death, but they found none. Though many false witnesses came forward, at last 2 came forward and says, "This man said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. And the high priest, that'd be Caiaphas, stood up and said, have you no answer to make? What is this that these men testify against you?" This is a second trial. But Jesus remained silent. Not like he talked to Annas. And not because now he's going to accuse himself. His words are they're making false accusations. And the high priest said to him, "I adjure you by the living God." That's interesting. "Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God." Jesus said to him, "You have said so. But I tell you, from now on, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming on the clouds of heaven." Then the high priest, Caiaphas, tore his robes and said, "He has uttered blasphemy. What further witness do we need?" In other words, they tried to get him to have basically self-accusation. He finally admitted, "Yes, I am the Son of God." They call it blasphemy. What further witnesses do we need? In other words, they couldn't find a witness, so they made him testify against himself on something that he's not going to deny. "You have now heard his blasphemy. What is your judgment?" They answered, "He deserves death." Then they spit in his face, struck him, and some slapped him, saying, "Prophesy to us, you Christ. Who is it that struck you?" Now they're going to keep this up between 3 o'clock, 3:30, until the Sanhedrin can meet on the Temple Mount. Some people think they might have met in one of these palaces, where Annas and Caiaphas meet in the high priest quarters. That could be. I'm going to suggest they take him to the Temple Mount and have some kind of an official meeting, or underneath they had a court meeting out just outside. They found the meeting place of the Sanhedrin just on the western side of the western wall. They've excavated it, so it could be in any of those places. But this is going to take place now. We're going to go to Luke chapter 22, and now the Sanhedrin is going to meet, beginning in chapter 2, looking in verse 66. "When day came, the assembly of the elders of the people gathered together before chief priests and scribes." So you've had Annas, you've had Caiaphas. Now here about the sunrise, about 5:15, that's when the sun would have come up. 5:15, 5:30. Now you've got the Sanhedrin having a rushed assembly to accuse Jesus. He's already been accused twice, already justified himself twice. "And they led him away to their council, and they said, 'If you are the Christ, tell us.' But he said to them, 'If I tell you, you will not believe. And if I ask you, you will not answer. But from now on, the Son of Man shall be seated at the right hand of the power of God.' So they all said, 'Are you the Son of God then?' And he said to them, 'You say that I am.' Then they said, 'What further testimony do we need? We have heard it ourselves from his own lips.'" So now the Sanhedrin plays the same card that Caiaphas had previously played that morning. It was kind of like a practice run at the court case, and now they had him do the same thing in the Sanhedrin. Now, chapter 23 of Luke, they're going to now take him to Pilate, to the Praetorium, Herod's palace on the west side of the city. It's on the western wall of the city at that time. I used to think they took him, that Pilate would have been staying at Fort Antoni, which is just on the northwest corner. In fact, that's what my framework map shows. But doing further research, Pilate probably would not have stayed there. It's more of a place for just, soldiers. He would have stayed at a more luxurious place, a palace, because Pilate would have been visiting the city of Jerusalem during the Holy Week. Normally he stayed at Caesarea, but Pilate would have come from Caesarea to be in the city with soldiers kind of to observe and make sure things didn't get out of hand. Pilate was, this is important to the story, Pilate was between a hard place and a rock. He was the governor over the Jews who did not like him, but he is also under pressure from the emperor and the Senate in Rome. That is one of the reasons why he was over here on the backwaters of the empire in Judea. He had gotten into some trouble. He's over here trying to regain his reputation. He does not want to blow this position as a leader. And that's going to play into the story here. He doesn't want to upset Caesar or the government that he's working for because he wants to be, move back to Rome and have a more prestigious place or not be executed himself for treason. So he's in a tough place between the Roman emperor and the Jewish people who will do anything to cause problems for him. So now, they're going to bring him to Pilate. Jesus is going to be brought to Pilate, who's staying in Herod's palace on the west side in the Praetorium. And here it is, chapter 23, verse 1. After the Sanhedrin, then the whole company of them arose and brought him before Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, now this is the fourth trial since 2:30 in the morning. And now it's probably about 6 o'clock in the morning. Fourth trial, and it's not even 4 hours. We're going, through trials every 45 minutes. They began to accuse him, saying, we found this man misleading our nation and forbidding us to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ, a king. Now they're getting some theology that Pilate's going to have to wrap his mind around. And Pilate took him aside and asked him, are you the king of the Jews? And he answered him, you have said so, Jesus says. Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, I find no guilt in this man. So in other words, there's Pilate talking to him. He says, are you the king of the Jews? He said, well, you're the one that said that. I'm not saying anything. Pilate realized there's nothing wrong with this guy. There's nothing going on. There's jealousy or something. They're trying to get this man executed. So he goes out and talks to them and says, I find no guilt. Notice what Pilate says. In his first trial, or the fourth trial, Jesus has been proved innocent 1, 2, 3 times. Now the fourth time, Pilate actually says, he's innocent. I find no guilt in this man, but they were urgent, saying, he stirs up people teaching throughout all Judea, from Galilee even to this place. There's Pilate's ticket out. Pilate says he's innocent, but realize he doesn't want to stand up for justice against the Jews and then get in trouble with the emperor. So when they start saying, or they say he's from Galilee, Pilate says, the king of Galilee, the one who's ruling Galilee, Herod Antipas, is in town. He's staying at the Hasmonean Palace, which is right in that same part of town, kind of between the high priest's mansion and Herod's Praetorium. He's right there also. I used to have Pilate staying in my previous diagrams in Fort Antonia, and Herod Antipas staying in Herod's palace, but it would make more sense that Herod Antipas would be in the Hasmonean Palace and Pilate staying in Herod's former palace, the Praetorium. Nonetheless, I know it's a lot of information, but these things have been thought out. So he says right here, he says he's from Galilee. When Pilate, chapter 23, verse 6, when Pilate heard this, he asked whether the man was Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he's not even my problem, Pilate thinks. I don't have to deal with this. He had gone through Annas, Caiaphas, the Sanhedrin, and now Pilate declares him innocent. The Jews don't want to accept an innocent decree. When he finds out he's from Galilee, he says, this is not even in my jurisdiction. I've got no right to make a decision. He sent him over to Herod, who was himself in Jerusalem at that time, also for the feast. When Herod saw Jesus, Herod Antipas now Jesus is over at the Hasmonean Palace. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad. What a great way to start the day. Now this is about, we would say 7 o'clock in the morning. And Herod's like, great, what a great way to start the day. When Herod saw Jesus, he was very glad, for he had long desired to see him, because he'd heard about him. He's a celebrity, and he was hoping to see some sign done by him. Like Moses did a sign for Pharaoh, Elijah did a sign for Ahab, maybe Jesus could do something for Herod Antipas. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. Jesus just stared at the ground, stared at his feet, stared off into space, didn't even recognize Herod Antipas. Interesting, he talks to Pilate, but he won't even give Herod Antipas the time of day. So he questioned him at some length, but he made no answer. The chief priests and the scribes stood by vehemently accusing him. Now the chief priests are still there. I mean, they've been with him since 2 o'clock in the morning, dogging him at all these trials. They vehemently accused him, And Herod with his soldiers treated him with contempt and mocked him. Then arraying him in splendid clothing, he sent him back to Pilate. Oh no, Pilate thinks. Oh no, here he comes. And Herod and Pilate became friends with each other that very day, for this was been, enmity between each other. Pilate then called together the chief priests and the rulers. Now this is the sixth and final trial. He's gone to Annas, the godfather, Caiaphas, the high priest. He's gone to the Sanhedrin. He's gone to Pilate, who declared him innocent. He's gone to Herod Antipas, who apparently finds no guilt. He's got jurisdiction over him, but he sends him back to Pilate, which means I've got nothing on him, and just beat him up and send him back to Pilate. Now Pilate's got him for the sixth time. So this time, Pilate calls together the chief priests and the rulers of the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who was misleading the people. And after examining him before you, behold, I did not find this man guilty of any of your charges against him." This is the second time Pilate has clearly declared him innocent. You may want to send to the part that he sends him over to Herod as another indication. He's trying to get rid of this problem. He's a Roman. He wants to do what's right. He wants to give a just decision. But he's caught between, again, the pressure of the empire and the pressure of the Jewish people he's ruling against. He says, I find nothing against him. Neither did Herod. So Pilate sees that Herod sending him back also declared him innocent. So you can see all these trials are ending with Jesus being declared innocent, or Jesus pointing out, this is a false trial. You have no jurisdiction. Neither did Herod, he said, for he sent him back to us. Look, nothing deserving death has been done by him. I will therefore punish and release him. So now he's going to whip Jesus. He's going to beat Jesus just as a kind of a public punishment. Now, will this satisfy the Jews? I beat him up. Is that good enough for you? But they cried out together, away with this man, and release to us Barabbas, a man who had been thrown into prison. Pilate addressed them once more, desiring to release Jesus. There it says again, Pilate desires to release Jesus. But they kept shouting, crucify him, crucify him. A third time he said, why? What evil has he done? I have found in him no guilt deserving death. We might say this is the fourth time Pilate has uttered with his own mouth, he is innocent. I will therefore punish him unjustly and release him. So you get a little bit of flesh, I get to do what's right, he gets his life, you don't complain to the Roman Empire, everybody's happy, everything's fine. But they were urgent, demanding with loud cries that he should be crucified, and their voices prevailed. So Pilate decided that their demand should be granted. He released the man who had been thrown into prison, this Barabbas, for insurrection and murder. He released a man that was arrested for murder and causing riots and treason against the government. Barabbas, for whom they had asked. But he delivered Jesus over to their will. And as they led him away from the Herod's palace, or the Praetorium, which is on the west side, they would have led him right out the northern gate, or the western wall, and right there is Calvary, the abandoned quarry that had been turned into a garden just outside the city walls by one of the main gates, so everyone can see. The Romans are in charge here. They can see the crucifixions and the prisoners dying as they come into the city. In other words, don't mess with the government in this city. And they led him away. They seized one, Simon of Cyrene, who was coming to carry the cross. But turning them, Jesus said, okay, go on like this. And it goes, two other of the criminals were led away to be put to death with him. And when they came to the place that is called the Skull, there they crucified him and the criminals, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they're doing. They cast lots for his garments, and then we're going to have Jesus' moments on the cross. He's going to be nailed on the cross at 9 o'clock in the morning. He will be on the cross from 9 o'clock. At noon, he'll cry out, my God, why have you forsaken me? And by 3 o'clock that afternoon, between 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, Jesus hangs his head and dies surprisingly soon, because you're supposed to die over a period of several days, possibly, hanging on a cross if your legs are not broken. You'll hang there and basically you suffocate just hanging by your arms. It's a miserable death. But Jesus is going to be on the cross at 9 o'clock. So there are the information right there between 1 o'clock in the morning when he's praying, 2 o'clock when he's arrested, and 9 o'clock in the morning, 2 a.m. to 9 a.m. Jesus goes through 6 trials. They're either mistrials, he's declared innocent, Pilate tries to set him free, but Jesus is destined to the cross, and that's where he ends up on Friday morning at 9 o'clock.